it's going out to various other social media, but if you want to get the best experience and see any comments and interact, it's best to join on the HAPS platform, and there's a link to that. It should be in the title of the broadcast. Anyway, with that said, we're here in Perryville Wood, and the other thing we're doing this broadcast as part of is an initiative by the Wildlife Trusts called 30 Days Wild, which they do every year in June. And the idea is in June people are encouraged to go out at least once a day and do something that involves interacting with wildlife and nature in where they are. So I thought today I'd come down here, and what we do today is we'll have a look at one of our meadows, which we're going to go into in a minute, and we'll have a look at one of the ways we maintain the meadows, which I'm sure from the title of the broadcast you can work out what that is. Anyway, I'm going to turn the camera around so you can see where I'm going, what I'm going into. We'll wander into the meadow and I'll explain a bit more as we go. So what you can see here is the meadow that we call Willow Mead. Well, you could see it before I turned around to close the gate. This is one of our meadows that we have here in the reserve. You've got just to the left of the image here what is the remnants of probably an ancient hedge line that's really got completely out of hedge-like structure. It's now largely overgrown, mature hawthorns, and the building you can see there is our archaeology section facility and hut. So that is where that is. Anyway, we're going to wander into the meadow from here. And you can see we've got the grassland, we've got lots of buttercups growing through. These are the yellow flowers, and other flowers like clover, which you can see down here. A red clover of some kind. Red clover, I don't know if there's more than one species of it, but some botanists will not tell me if I'm wrong. And these meadows are examples of what gets called unimproved grassland. And what unimproved means here, oddly for ecological purposes, is that they're good. They've not been fertilised and made ready for agricultural growth. So that low fertility of the soil is a good thing generally for the wildflowers and so on. In high fertility soil, they tend to be rather outcompeted. But one of the things that will happen in Britain, if you leave meadowland like this, over time it will eventually scrub up, become secondary scrub, become secondary woodland, and stop being the sort of grassland habitat it is. So we have to manage these things, you have to maintain them if you want to keep the grassland open. There's a whole lot of ecological theory about whether and how that happened pre-human times, and a lot of thinking about the fact it might well be large grazing grounds that in pre-human times kept areas of grassland and areas open and not entirely woodland. Vast topic, lots in that, lots to talk about in that, but we'll just cover it very briefly like that for today. But that means we've got a challenge here, because if we just left this for nature to do its thing, we wouldn't have the meadowlands, we wouldn't have the sort of facility we've got here. And if that were the case, overall the site would be less diverse. It would have more woodland, but we've got woodland, it would have less meadowland, and overall it would be less diverse. So we want to keep our meadows open. And there's lots of ways you can do that. You can cut them mechanically, you can cut them by hand, but the way we've chosen, well, there's a clue here to the way we've chosen. Well, I'm sure you've guessed it from the broadcast title, but there's a clue there as to how we broadcast that. And you can see our clue is also attracting some insects, some green bottles, I think they are, Lucilia, I think is the genus, and a few other flies and a few other insects. and probably a few beetles and things and their larvae and their eggs living down inside there. So there's a cow pat, and that's, again, that's a bit of habitat, that's a bit of interesting nutritional resource that things come to. And obviously that, it's a cow pat, so what does that mean? Well, that means that the way we manage these meadows, the way we look after them, is by having them grazed by cattle. People who are familiar with the reserve, who've been here in the past, might remember that until quite recently we used horses to do the grazing in this site rather than cattle, and they did a decent enough job, but the horses, one of the horses died, the owner didn't get a replacement, and we didn't have a local horse owner who we could work with to have the site grazed. So for the last year and this, we've decided that we're going to graze with cattle instead, and we've entered into an arrangement with a local farmer to provide us with some cattle. Graze that. So there should be 4 of them somewhere in here, and we're just going to go and check that they are all here, present and correct. Somebody's already had a look at them today. We have a rota of people who come and check on the cattle at least once a day, just to make sure they're all fine, they've not come to any trouble, they've not got out of the place we're trying to keep them in and gone into the woodland and started to change the habitat where we don't want them to. They've been very well behaved so far. Now I'm in the field with the cows. They're very placid animals, these 4. They don't cause trouble, they're not bothered by people, they're not aggressive at all. But you always be careful and cautious around livestock. So I'm not going to go particularly close, especially when I'm paying attention to this camera and this broadcast rather than the animals. Although I suspect there would be no trouble if I did walk up to them. So I can see 3 here. 1, 2, 3. Oh, there's 4. 2 of them are standing together. Let's walk a little bit closer so everybody can count them and then do a bit of a zoom in. So these are our 4 cattle, 4 cows that we have, basically maintaining these meadows for us. They're sort of living lawnmowers really, and just doing a good job for us, starting to eat away at the grass. They've only been here a few days, so at the moment you've still got a lot of grass, a lot of tall vegetation, but come back in a month or so and they'll have done a really good job. Let's zoom you in a bit. So there you are. Hopefully people can see there are indeed 4 cows, which there should be. So that's all good to know. Zoom back out there. And they're just grazing away there, generally doing the job we want them to do. So they're a very useful thing to have as an addition to the reserve, or as an additional management technique to add to the way we look after this place. They will helpfully keep the grassland open, they will helpfully create a bit of structural diversity by eating some things, by churning up some of the ground and giving a bit of bare exposed earth, which again is habitat for some things. And just that diversity that grazing animals bring, again, is often an advantage over more human or mechanical or planned methods of management where things are a bit more regimented and straight. So there we go, there's our 4 cows grazing away. I'm just heading towards another gate out of the reserve now. Or not out of the reserve, out of these meadows, just to check something. So you can see we've got a gate here. We've got all our gates closed, of course, to keep the cows where they are. And yes, I'll just do this from here. So we do try to keep, obviously, them out and keep the gates closed. But you can see along here, which is what I was coming to look at, rather a shady bit. In the warm sunshine in the middle of the day, the cows, not stupidly, like to stay a bit in the shade. And you can see they seem to favour this rather shady patch. If you look up, you can see it's nicely sheltered and not covered over. And you can see they spent a lot of time here because there's a lot of dung. So that's been where they've often been found here. If you come here during the day when it's sunny, they're often sheltering in here, just keeping themselves nice and cool and out of the direct sunlight. We've obviously got water. We've got a water trough somewhere in the reserve so that they've got plenty to drink, and they've got all the grass and stuff to eat here. So there we go. There's our 4 cows again, doing their job grazing. And what we'll do, it's only going to be a brief broadcast to have a look at these, briefly explain what they're doing. What we'll do is I think I'll zoom in on one of the cows and then we'll finish the broadcast there. So I'm aiming, as part of the 30 Days Wild project, to try and do something here on Haps every day in June, looking at something to do with nature, the natural world, wildlife, studying wildlife and the like. So I will aim to do that, I say, once a day in June. And with any luck, oops, it's really hard to manage this camera when it's this zoomed in.